The Prophet on the Long Road. Adapted by Sandwell Museum and Art Service. Read by Alex Howell, with additional words by Bishop Francis Asbury. Whither am I going? To the New World? What to do? To gain honour? No, if I know my own heart. To get money? No. I am going to live to God and to bring others to do so. These are just some of the questions I was asked when I announced that I will be going to take the teachings of Methodism to the USA. As I now reach the end of my life, I can say in my bid to reach as many people as possible, I travelled 270,000 miles, preached 15,000 sermons, and as a bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church, ordained 4,000 clergymen. I never owned a house, and instead slept on the road, in ditches and barns, and occasionally in guest bedrooms. I became the first Methodist bishop in America. I wrote diaries and letters throughout my life, and most importantly for those that studied the past during the American War of Independence. I was the only British person to stay, although I was arrested several times and fined and my movements restricted. It soon became apparent to the authorities that I supported the American wish to be free from Britain and was allowed to go about my work. I even met George Washington. I don't wish to boast, but some have even called me one of the founding fathers of the United States. Why should this interest you? Well, I grew up in your part of the world, between West Bromwich and Wednesbury. I was born in Old England, near the foot of Hampstead Bridge, in the parish of Handsworth, about 4 miles from Birmingham in Staffordshire, and according to my after knowledge, on the 20th or the 21st day of August, in the year of our Lord 1745. Even though my parents were not very good with dates, my father Joseph was a hard-working man, and my mother was the most dominating figure in my younger life. She was called Eliza. When I was 12 months old, my family moved to a small cottage on Newtown Road. It is here that my story truly begins. We had lived happily in the cottage for 5 years, when suddenly, just before my younger sister's 5th birthday, she passed away. That's when things changed for my family and for myself. Naturally, this caused my mother deep distress, and she sank into a hopeless grief. No parent should have to bury their child. I remember her weeping and telling everyone, "I can't imagine my beautiful, beautiful daughter, my child, dwelling in such a dark, dark place." In times of grief, people look for hope and distraction in many different ways. Some bad, some good, and sometimes life-changing. My mother took comfort during her time of loss in the new Methodist movement. I think the prayers and sermons comforted her. They encouraged her to believe that my sister Sarah was not in a dark place, but was at peace, and it was all part of God's plan for us. My mother would read me Bible stories. By the time I was 6, I could read it myself.
"Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand."
My mother would make me walk for prayer meetings and sermons. As mother was finding herself, it became a difficult time for me. I was often teased by the other boys at school because of my mother's beliefs. I don't blame them. If God teaches us anything, it is to forgive. People often fear and attack those who are different or think differently to them, not out of anger, but due to fear and lack of understanding. It must be said, however, that this new Methodist movement was very attractive to us ordinary working folk. In Church of England services we were told we should know our place, usually at the bottom of the pile or the lowest rung of the ladder, and that rich people were better than us. Let me explain. There is no better example of this than in a letter from the Duchess of Buckingham to the Countess of Huntingdon. I thank your ladyship for the information concerning the Methodist preachers. The doctrines are most repulsive and strongly tainted with impertinence and disrespect towards their superiors, in perpetual endeavouring to level all ranks and to do away with all distinction. It is monstrous to be told you have a heart as sinful as the common wretches that crawl on the earth. Well, for us common wretches, Methodism was different, and we felt more equal. To us, it was more equal. To us, it was more of a back-to-basics approach. Methodism was growing in popularity, but there was still lots of opposition to the movement, particularly from the authorities who saw it as a threat. Only 2 years before my birth, John Wesley, the famous founder of Methodism in England, a tall, fierce man with long brown hair and always dressed in black, had spoken in Wednesbury, and there had been a riot. Wesley's hair was pulled and his coat ripped. The riot was blamed on the Methodists, but I do not think this was the case. I attended the local schoolhouse at Snail's Green. My teacher used to beat me cruelly and filled me with a horrible dread, which caused me to leave school at 13 and became a blacksmith's apprentice at the local forge. I was happy there and enjoyed my work. My employer treated me more like a son and an equal rather than just a low apprentice. I also slowly got more and more interested in my mother's religion, attending my local Anglican church, All Saints in West Bromwich, and listening to the Reverend Edward Stillingfleet, who was sympathetic with the Methodist cause and ideas. Myself and like-minded friends met at various houses, and I was an enthusiastic speaker. My first official sermon was at Manwood's cottage, a short walk from my place of work. From then on, although still working in the forge, I also became a travelling preacher, going to almost every place within my reach. I continued as a local preacher for 5 years, until I was then at the age of 21 or 22 years old, when I gave myself up fully to God and his work and started to preach full-time. I was very dedicated, but I was still a young man, and although my life never would have been right for a wife, my early letters do give away that I very much desired a relationship with a girl called Nancy Brooks. She did not, however, return my affections and saw my partiality for her as inappropriate. After this I was inclined to continue as yet in a single state. However, now I preached all over England, first Staffordshire and Gloucestershire, then Bedfordshire and Sussex, before moving on to Northamptonshire in 1769 and Wiltshire in 1770. On the 7th of August 1771, I responded to a question that would forever result in my name being more closely associated with America than that of my own native land, as many of you probably have never heard of me. The call came from our leader of the Methodist movement, John Wesley. Our brethren in America call aloud for help. Who are willing to go over and help them? I offered myself for the job and rushed back to the Midlands to bid a hasty farewell to my friends and family, particularly my mother. I remember the conversation as if it were yesterday. "What do you mean going? Going where?" she said. "To the New World, Mother, to America." "The New World? What to do? To gain honour?" my mother asked. "No, Mother. John Wesley asked for volunteers to join him, to help the people in America. I am not going to gain honour or to get money. I'm going to live for God and bring others to do so. After further questions, tears and sobs, we parted on a promise. "Promise you'll return to me by the time you're 30, she said, holding back her tears. I did promise. However, it was a promise I could not keep. I never did return, and I never saw her again. A month later, I found myself on the ship to the New World. I was 26 when I left West Bromwich and that tiny cottage I grew up in. After a 53-day journey, I first set foot on American soil in Philadelphia on the 27th of October, 1771. The very next day, I preached my first sermon in the New World at St. George's Church. I was brought into a large church where I met a considerable congregation. The people looked on us with pleasure, hardly knowing how to show their love sufficiently, bidding us welcome with fervent affection and receiving us as the angels of God. By 1772, Wesley had appointed me his general assistant in America, which was, to my annoyance, a position I was to lose the following year when I was replaced by a more experienced preacher, Thomas Rankin. He was a shorter man than Wesley and myself, with thinning white hair, and carried an air of tradition and authority. Soon after, I began in New York, but I was eager to push further into the continent of America, taking my message to the pioneers who were pushing forward the boundaries of the colonies. I began my mission travelling on foot and on horseback as far as I could go. The constant travelling and wading through swamps and sleeping in holes took its toll on my health, and I constantly suffered from rheumatism. I never owned a house, and instead slept on the road, in ditches and in barns, and occasionally a guest house. In 1784, I was ordained as Methodist minister along with Mr. Thomas Coke. He was a short and slightly overweight Welshman who came to America from Brecon. We were both given the title of Superintendent of the Church in the USA, and within 4 years the title changed somehow to Bishop. Wesley was disgusted with this title, as he was against the idea of bishops, and wrote a very rude letter to me. "How can you? How dare you suffer yourself to be called a bishop? I shudder at the very thought. Men may call me a knave or a fool, a rascal, a scoundrel, and I am content, but they shall never, by my consent, call me a bishop." Well, after this, the American Methodist movement and the British Methodist movement went their own ways. When George Washington was inaugurated as the first President of the United States, the Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church, at my request, sent the President a letter of congratulations that expressed our confidence in Washington and to preserve the civil and religious liberties which have been transmitted to us by the providence of God and the glorious Revolution. I met George Washington when I delivered the letter personally on the 26th of May, 1785. He received me in a polite manner, and I found him very open to discussion. He is quite the plain country gentleman, and after dinner we had a private meeting to discuss business. Who would have thought, from a tiny labourer's cottage between West Bromwich and Wednesbury to the company of the President of America, my life was one of extremes. Who would have believed that a boy from the Midlands, where no one hardly knows me, became a celebrity in America's founding history?